Greetings to all my tech heads out there in the KevTechify Nation, and if you're new here, welcome. In this episode, we're going to look at 802.1X Authentication. We'll be discussing security using the 802.1X port-based authentication, controlling that 802.1X authorization state. 802.1X configuration will end this up. This episode is part of my series on network security. I'm Kevin here at KevTechify. Let's get this adventure started. IEEE 802.1x standard defines a port-based access control and authentication protocol that restricts unauthorized workstations from connecting to your LAN through publicly accessible switch ports. The authentication server authenticates each workstation that is connected to a switch port before making available any services offered by the switch or the LAN. There are three 802.1x roles. That first role is the supplicant, or you can think of this as the client computer. The device here, you can think of it as a workstation. It requests access to the LAN and switch services, and then it responds to any requests from the switch. So the supplicant, the client, is requesting access, and then if the switch has any questions, it'll answer that. The workstation must be running 802.1x compliance software, and the port that the client is attached to in the supplicant, that client, has to be in the 802.1x specification. The next role here is the authenticator, and this is probably a switch on your network. It controls physical access to the network based on the authentication status of the client. The switch acts as an intermediary or a proxy between the client, which once again was the supplicant, and the authentication server. It's requesting identifying information from the client, verifying that information with the authentication server, and then relaying a response to the client. The switch uses Radius software agent, which is responsible for encapsulating and de-encapsulating your extensible authentication protocol frames and interacting with that authentication server. And then that third role here is our authentication server. This performs the actual authentication of our client, of our supplicant. The authentication server validates the identity of the client and notifies the switch whether the client is authorized to access the LAN and the switch services. Because the switch acts as a proxy, the authentication service is transparent to that client. Now, the Radius security system with our extensible authentication protocol, our EAP extensions, is the only supported authentication server. Here's the complete message exchange between the supplicant, the authenticator, and the authentication server. Encapsulation happens twice here. First, encapsulation happens between the supplicant and the authenticator. Our EAP data here is encapsulated using our EAP OL frames. So that's our first encapsulation. The second encapsulation, once again, is right here between the authenticator and the authentication server. This is our EAP data again, and we encapsulate it using Radius. It may be necessary to configure a switch port to override the 802.1x authentication process. To do this, we use the authentication port control command. Now, notice this is done on the interface. So look at our prompt here. We are in the configuration of an interface. Most likely we are in our fast Ethernet 01. And this interface configuration command, we use this to control the port authorization. Now, there are three different parameters you can use for this one. The first parameter is auto. This enables 802.1x port authentication and causes the port to begin in unauthorized state. During this time, only EAP OL, spanning tree, and CDP Cisco Discovery Protocol frames are the only types of frames that are to be sent or received through the port until the client device has been authenticated. The second parameter here is forced authorized. The port sends and receives normal traffic without 802.1x based authentication of the client. This here is the default setting on there. The third parameter is forced unauthorized. And this causes the port to remain in an unauthorized state. This ignores all other attempts by the client to authenticate. The switch cannot provide any authentication services to the client through that port. There are a few basic steps in the 802.1x configuration process. The first step here is to enable AAA using the AAA new configuration command. So that's our first step. The second step here is to designate the radius server and configure its addresses. So here we're going to say radius server. We're going to give it the name here. Then we go ahead and specify the IP address, the authentication ports, the accounting ports. We specify the key here, the password to get into our radius server. So we go ahead and we set up our radius server. The third step is down here. And what this is we're going to create the 802.1x port-based authentication method here using the AAA authentication.1x command. And this is the settings we're doing. Step 4, we globally enable 802.1x port-based authentication using the .1x system-authentication-control. So system-auth-control command. Step 5, which is actually way down here. So what we have to do is we have to go into our interface. So we chose to go into Fast Ethernet 01. Good practice is always set up your description. We have to make sure that we are in an access port. So we do switch port mode access. And then we have to enable port-based authentication on the interface using the authentication port control auto command. Step 6, this last one down here, is the .1x PAE command. Now, enabling the 802.1 authentication on the interface using that command, once again, 802.1x.PAE command, the port access entity. The authenticator right here, the authenticator option sets that port access entry PAE type so that the interface acts only as an authenticator and will not respond to any messages meant for the supplicant. It was my pleasure to provide you with this wonderful episode on 802.1x authentication. If you like this episode and you got value out of it, and of course, depending upon what platform you're using, please click that like button, give a 5-star rating, leave a comment. This all helps me bring you more great content. Please take a minute to subscribe to my channel. All of my socials and contact information are on my website, KevTechify.com, and you can get all these episodes in video and podcast form. In the upper right is my playlist for my series on network security. In the bottom right is one of my favorite videos that I linked just for you. Thank you so much for watching this episode on my series on network security. Once again, I'm Kevin. This is KevTechify. I'll see you next time for another great adventure.